Dr. Molly Nation. She's the new faculty member here from, she's in the Marine and Ecological Sciences Department. I see a lot of you here from Marine and Ecological Sciences, so thank you for coming. And she is a recent PhD graduate. She got her PhD in June of 2016 from University of South Florida in science education. Right? And before that, she was actually a student at Georgia Southern University, which some of you may know is where I taught. And she was a student then there when I taught, and we figured out that she actually did not have me for organic. She had two of my colleagues at the time, but I was in the department at that point. So anyway, she's going to tell us a little bit about her PhD research, and I'm looking forward to it.
I guess for those of you that I interviewed here in February, this is the final data analysis of what I presented back then in February. So I'm excited to share that with you guys. So just a little bit of background on teachers' beliefs. So NASBR 87 said that more so than subject knowledge and pedagogical content knowledge, they can be the most influential instruments in our instructional practices. And they're largely tied to our instruction and therefore have an impact on student understanding of the content. So relating to that to the teaching of climate change, we found that a lot of teachers and students and the general public also have misconceptions about the causes of climate change, which include ozone depletion as a contributor to climate change. And so this has been cited among those groups. So the purpose of my research was to understand how teachers' beliefs about climate change impacted their instruction and implementation of the curriculum that was designed, and then also understand how that impacted student understanding and outcomes. So the research was significant because it's done in the area of teachers' beliefs, which have an impact on climate change education. And there's not a lot of research that is happening currently on that. The goal of the research was to understand how their beliefs affected their classroom practices and how those beliefs and practices impact student outcomes. Outcomes related were student learning of the content and then willingness to take action. The study contributes to greater understanding of the beliefs on the impact of curriculum implementation. So just a little bit of background on the capacity in which this curriculum was designed. The work of the Change Project, which was an NSF project, was developed curriculum to implement into the secondary marine science classrooms, and it focused on climate change education through the use of an ebook, narrative, simulations that occurred on the computer, and then in-class activities, so typical laboratory activities, as well as all the types of curricula that you would expect, like PowerPoints, student note-taking guides, teacher note-taking, teacher guides, and so on. So the gap that was identified through this research or literature review was that teachers' beliefs about climate change impact their practices and student outcomes. So you'll see that right here. So this relationship was identified about teacher understandings of climate change and how it impacts their classroom practices. But then this next component, which was the change curriculum that was designed to teach climate change education into the marine science classroom. So this back and forth relationship that was identified in which the instructional practices of the teachers impact the curriculum at the same time that the curriculum is impacting their instructional practices, both of which are having an impact on student outcomes. So the research questions that were addressed through the study were, how do teachers' beliefs about climate change influence their classroom instruction of climate change? How do their understandings of climate change impact their instruction of the curriculum? And then what impacts do these beliefs and understandings have on student outcomes? I'll just briefly go over the instruments that were developed in order to do the research study. So the teacher survey was developed. It was actually the Bronsted study was developed, or the survey was developed for educated lay people, and what we did was we modified it in order to really survey the beliefs of teachers. The classroom observation protocol was developed, again, using the Horizons method or protocol, which is used a lot throughout educational research. The student survey was similar to that of the teacher survey, but then again, modified in order to really survey the students. The teacher interview was developed and piloted in semesters previous by myself and my colleagues. And then lastly, the change curriculum helped to develop a midterm and final exam that all students in the marine science classes took. So this kind of goes over the collection and the analysis, the data sources, the methods, and then what was used. It was a mixed method study, so the incorporation of qualitative and quantitative, which was fully mixed in order to make a more coherent picture and in an effort to triangulate findings. So the analysis for research questions 1. So the themes that were identified based on the data collection and results were that teachers believe that anthropogenic causes are the contributing factor to climate change. There was agreement among not only the teachers but the students, which I'll get into in a minute. They also placed a high level of importance on their personal beliefs in teaching the curriculum. So the participants said that personal beliefs are important in teaching controversial issues. If a teacher is more passionate about these topics, they're more likely to teach them better. Then we get into this idea of neutrality, which I'll discuss in greater detail. But what we found was that the teachers, in an effort to remove their own personal bias of the topic, presented the material in a neutral sense. So we're currently doing follow-up study on what that really means to be neutral in the classroom. But from my understanding was that presenting both sides of the issue was how they were saying that they are remaining neutral. And then they said that there was a strong student trying to make the students reach these decisions on their own through these types of dialogue discussion that would allow them to create student decision making about climate change in their own regard. And then lastly, this high level of concern for climate change. That teachers we found that the teachers had a high level of concern specifically through future generations, and I'll get into that again more deeply. So the teacher understanding themes that were identified were that the curriculum increased, I don't know why this is shaking so much.
It's the elevator.
Okay.
Literally, it's the elevator and the projector.
The curriculum increased their understanding of climate change. So before teaching the curriculum and then after teaching the curriculum, we found that there was a significant increase in understanding of the basic concepts of climate change. And this was a 0.05 value, which is not uncommon. The Kinghorn study from 2016 suggests that teachers that experience a new curriculum are more likely to learn curriculum. So that can either be through accessing outside resources or through those instantaneous aha moments or understanding. And then, so I just said that teachers are learning climate change through outside sources, and then they value their role as educators and informants. This was found in the teacher survey where teachers were ranking what they could do to help mitigate climate change, and educating the public was among the top ranked answers that they came up with. So instructional practices, we found that the change curriculum provided a place for climate change that did not exist before. This is common that climate change is not a part of the traditional curriculum in the K-12 setting. So having these curriculum materials accessible and available for the teachers was an easy way to just get them to begin to teach climate change. However, the teachers were not making explicit connections to the student life, and this includes a place-based nature of the curriculum. So the curriculum was designed specifically to be teaching Southwest Florida students, specifically in the Tampa Bay, about how climate change is connecting to their personal life, to their communities, and to the built and natural environment. But what we found is that the teachers weren't always making those personal connections, which is important for place-based education, for the students to really feel connected to the issues. So in that regard, the implementation of the curriculum didn't always meet the expectations of the project, which is also what we're doing in this follow-up study. And then their espoused beliefs about what good pedagogical practices are in the science classroom weren't always observed. And this could be for a variety of reasons. And they cited the controversial nature of the topic, the political climate of 2016, and just their personal bias that they weren't comfortable in espousing in there. So in summary, their level of understandings and beliefs about climate change didn't necessarily impact their level of instruction. So I said before that I did a Pearson product moment correlation coefficient, and I found that there was essentially no correlation between the teachers and the students. And I'll talk about that a little bit in presentations. But as a whole, the participants taught it similarly, regardless of their level of understanding. So teachers that had a high level of understanding of climate change versus teachers that may have had a kind of lower level, they were all teaching the curriculum in similar ways. And that was data that was collected through the observation protocol. Research question 3 asks what the impact of teachers' beliefs and understandings were on student outcomes. And so here's where I show you the R values. You'll only see something here, which is, I mean, that looks high, but it really is not meaningful because of the small participant number of the teachers. So some interesting things that came out of the student survey were that they ranked reducing the use of cars and recycling as top ranked actions, which isn't all that uncommon in that we find that pro-environmental behaviors, regardless of the connection to climate change, are showing up as high-ranked actions that students can do or mitigated behaviors. So it's not clear that students are really making the connection as to how recycling is mitigating climate change, but yet they're ranking it as a high-ranked action that they can take. And then taking political action ranked low on the list. So it might be assumed that because a lot of the students that were experiencing the curriculum aren't of voting age, so they may feel like taking political action is only can occur in voting. And if you're not a voting age, then, they may not feel like that's an option for them. I also found that, contrary to what a lot of our teachers thought, that students, over 80% of the students thought it was certain or very likely that humans were contributing to climate change. So teachers removing their personal bias for fear of backlash from community members, stakeholders, or students because they may disagree with their own personal beliefs about climate change is not exactly showing up in the data. Over 80% think that it's at least very likely. And then students ranked the top following causes of climate change. So one top ranked action was burning fossil fuels and driving automobiles were significantly higher than the rest, but we still found that ozone depletion ranked among the top 3 highest. So this persistent misconception that continues to occur among the general public and our teachers is also, it's happening in our students too. There's not real clear evidence as to why they think this happens, but follow-up interviews with students found that there's an association that the hole in the ozone that's caused by CFCs is allowing more sunlight to reach the Earth, which is what's increasing the global temperature. So there's really that systems thinking that's happening. I don't know where they're learning that, but that's what's happening. So some specific findings were that Mrs. Gary's student scores significantly lower than the rest of the student participants, which is probably why I had a higher R value there. Those are pseudonyms too, so don't worry. And then what I found was that students had significantly higher levels of concern for climate change impact on future generations. Teachers also had this, they ranked this as the highest as well for future generations. It wasn't significant, but the student population was. So it sort of begs the question, if we all continue to place this concern for the next generation, at what point do they feel that it's personally relevant to them? In following up with the teachers, I found that they are seeing their students as the next generation, but then their students aren't seeing themselves as that next generation. So that continued to push that concern on the next generation. So overall, again, I mentioned this, there was really little impact that was had on the student outcomes, but this might be because of the similar implementation of the curriculum. Implementations, obviously, the sample size and population of the teachers was relatively small, but the students we had, I had student data that I analyzed of over 1,800 students, so I had access to all the student data, which is where I was able to get those significant findings. And then the background of the teachers. So what I found was that a lot of our teachers are alternatively certified, and they're not going through traditional teacher education programs, so they're not maybe necessarily getting those pedagogical practices in their preparation. And then in order to avoid potential bias in the project, these are all first-time instructors of the curriculum because I specifically removed the alpha teachers. And then, again, restriction of the research to specifically marine science teachers teaching this curriculum. So I'm making assumptions based on just these. And then the observations that occurred. So in an effort to see if this may be what they say they believe wasn't really showing up in their instruction, I did observations of non-climate change or non-controversial classes or periods, and I found similar findings. And again, the political climate of fall 2016, which is funny because it was a year ago today, that election day in 2016. But all of my research took place during the fall of 2016, and I'm sure you guys remember what it was like. So some implications were that participants, these are teachers and students, agree with scientists' claims that anthropogenic causes are contributing to climate change. They're concerned about the negative impacts that climate change is going to have on them personally, and they're specifically concerned for future generations. So what we found was because they aren't employing the types of pedagogical practices that they elicit as being these effective ways of science teaching, regardless of controversy. And this was found because I went in and did follow-up observations. Teacher beliefs about climate change do not impact their instruction, and I'm going to need to read my notes, but what we found is that similar findings from the Kuttner and Markman study that teachers, this term called operational beliefs, so if teachers have these beliefs that they hold, but they're not acting on them during their instruction, it may be that the term operational beliefs, meaning when they are acting on them, it becomes an operational belief. So further research is we're going to be doing that. And then their idea of neutrality continued to come up, and due to teachers' political controversy, backlash from their personal beliefs and stakeholders and administrations. So what I found is that we need to encourage students to share their personal beliefs on issues with students, because otherwise they're left to make up their minds based on media outlets or the politics, which aren't necessarily rooted in science. So this is what's happening, retrospective interviews of teachers to help provide further insight on what it means to remain neutral. Again, this idea of neutrality that continues to come up. And teachers that have multiple experience of teaching the curriculums. Again, we're doing follow-up research on this too to see if there's a difference that comes about. And then it led the question that are political beliefs essentially held as religious beliefs? So a lot of times what I found was that the teachers are comparing their beliefs about climate change, teaching climate change, to that of evolution. That was interesting. And then climate change education, again, it's important, and we can't simply just add it to the curriculum, that we need to really prepare teachers to be able to effectively teach climate change education in the K-12 setting. And then again, support from stakeholders and administrators needs to be apparent among the teachers in order for them to feel safe in presenting their personal beliefs about climate change, regardless of political hierarchy.
Anybody have questions?
Sure, Dr. Tom.
Yeah, Molly, I'm fascinated about the ozone depletion thing because I started judging science fairs for the Florida State Science and Engineering Group 25 years ago. And at that time, students were conflating ozone depletion and global warming. Or would it make sense to go back and look when, because CFCs and ozone has really been out of the news for so long, but if you've gone back and looked to see when it stopped becoming a salient feature of the news cycle and tie that in with how old their parents were at that time? Maybe that's something their parents picked up at kids. Where's it come from?
Well, we did a little bit of research on that, and so CFCs were outlawed in 1996, and the majority of my student population was born in like 2000, so they weren't even alive when
But
CFCs.
their parents were.
Yeah, and
and their teachers were probably.
and it seems to be more prevalent among the general population, but than the teacher population, but it still exists. So that might be something to look at, that they are getting those, sometimes the parents' beliefs tend to be more impactful than their teachers.
It's just fascinating. This is a multi-decadal inflation
Right.
problem in education. Yeah.
Sure, yeah.
Molly, first of all, just a small correction. The Montreal Protocol that outlawed CFCs was, I think it was 1986, not 96. But it's okay.
Okay.
And,
Well, let me check.
Yeah, you can
I'm
check
sure
with
you
that.
may be right.
yeah,
I
'cause it's in
did
Canada.
cite 1996, but
Uh-oh.
and my
Yeah, Google that.
It wasn't completely banned until the 90s, so she's.
Soft CFCs. The one good thing for the negative camp is, you get your students to raise their hands and you'll say the hole in the ozone layer. So that's a good example to show them, like, it's interesting that people have so many strong beliefs for or against something, but they don't really understand how it works. One thing I do to help my students understand is I always say, well, how do you get a suntan or a sunburn? And they say, oh, well, UV rays. So, okay, so the hole in the ozone layer allows more UV rays in, and so that, causes skin cancer, and that's why we have to wear sunscreen. So I do that. Go a little further. Maybe I shouldn't do this, but one of my uncles passed away from skin cancer. It metastasized, but he's a roofer here in Florida, and so he had really bad skin cancer at 32. And so I used that example, and then so they're tying in. They realize, okay, one thing is warming, whereas the other thing, the hole in the ozone layer, is letting in UV rays, and then they think of like suntans and sunburns. But that is interesting. Do you have an update on that Montreal Protocol?
1987 was when it was signed.
1987. Okay.
But it was updated in 92.
CFCs
Which
were
is
banned in
86 in
1997.
American.
So can I just quickly address this? We found that this idea of ozone depletion was showing up earlier when we were piloting the curriculum. So what we did was we went in, developed new introductory curriculum that really showed greenhouse gas and how that was contributing to global warming, because we thought that just showing the process of CO2 emissions causing the greenhouse effect was going to debunk that misconception. But you're right, it didn't. It continued to persist.
I got 3 questions, but none of them have to do with ozone. I can wait.
I think there's a popular misunderstanding of what the sun does. And I don't know that they necessarily get it from somebody else. It's just, everybody thinks there's a hole and therefore the sun comes through. I'm not sure how we fix it. We made in the 90s such an issue over the hole in the ozone layer that it's like a meme. It's a cultural awareness, and they're doing it because of the systematics. There's a hole, therefore the sun comes through. Therefore, now we have a climate change issue, therefore. I don't know that we'll ever fix it.
Yeah, there's a lot of research about misconceptions and how difficult they are to really break those.
Yeah.
Whoever, I guess. Sorry, you, yeah.
So yeah, based on current misconceptions of how methane is produced, most people think of it more in the agricultural side with cows, but however, would it also have industrial changes? Do we need to inform students of this isn't the only source of methane, but it's the most contributing, rather than it's the only source of methane?
Do we? Yeah, I think the top 3 didn't even show industrial emissions as one of the ranked. Did I already pass it? Yeah. So use of cars or driving automobiles, I forget which one it was. Oh, there it is. So we also had industrial or factory emissions as one of them, and it doesn't even show up among the top 3 ranked. So meat production.
A lot of people don't understand that methane and natural gas are the same thing.
Was meat production? It was not.
So weird.
That it wasn't on
Yeah.
there. Well, not necessarily. we made the survey, so, but that might be something in order, that we should put on there in the future. The meat production would be something to put on there. It was, the original survey was for educated lay people. We tried to tailor it to be more towards students and teachers. And, you know, we only have like a list of 6 things, you know, so I guess the list could go on. Right.
I'm kind of curious as to why you choose to use the word belief, and it's not a criticism.
Yeah.
And the reason I'm asking that is when I think about the things that I cover in an environmental science class, that terminology only comes up in the arena of evolution and climate change.
Yeah.
And I can't think of any other scientific concept where we talk about the science as a belief.
Right.
Like, it's not a belief. That's what the science is telling us.
Yeah, I mean, this
Do
is.
you believe in gravity?
Yeah,
exactly.
To believe in the ozone hole.
Right.
You know, we don't talk about that. So why do we socially in today's society discuss climate change in that realm?
Well, I think the term belief is as a construct, right? And so using it, I mean, a lot of times in the literature it's used as a knowledge form, but the knowledge is informing your beliefs. Right? It's pretty complicated, and I don't know why we don't use beliefs in other senses, or we're using beliefs in only these 2 senses. You know, if you think about evolution instruction, that's really a core belief, right? Your core values, that it's learning and believing in education is in direct conflict of what you believe as a core value if you are a Christian. And so I understand how that can be very difficult for teachers that may not agree with it, but still be able to teach. But climate change is, you know, what is the belief about climate change? What is the core value you have that is in direct conflict of climate change? I don't know that there is one. I think that it's because it's been politicized so much, and that students, or well, teachers are holding their political beliefs at such a high regard that they feel that if you agree with climate scientists, then you're somehow not agreeing with your political politicians.
The same thing with evolution. It wasn't an issue so much back in the day until it got politicized. And the term believe in evolution then became a political issue as much as believing in climate change. It's a political issue more than anything. And once it was politicized, now we have a choice of whether we believe in it or not.
And maybe you've hit on something. There's this integration of politics and religion, and they're conflated now. And so it's difficult for people to pull those things apart.
Yeah.
I was just going to say, belief is a nice way to call a system that somebody holds onto that's in opposition to facts.
Yeah.
I believe this, and the facts say that, but I believe this, so that might be another use of that word.
Like, so the people who don't believe in climate change, you know, what do you find their arguments are usually?
We didn't have any non-believers as teachers. We did have some non-believers as students. I don't know that they have beliefs that are rooted in fact.
So
You
they
know,
have
I
no
think
fact.
that it's been propagandized. Is that the correct term for that? In among American culture specifically, and so I think that that's what they're holding on to are political values more so than they don't have the scientific values to uphold that would support that.
Well, yeah, one of the big ones, and maybe some other people have heard this, is like most of the CO2 comes from volcanoes.
Yeah.
I don't know if you've heard that.
I have.
I'll call out because he always bugs me at the gym. Our own Pat O'Connell, who works in the library, he's an anti-climate, or he doesn't
Climate
believe in
denialist.
yeah.
Yeah.
But I mean, it's so if we now know, you know, that there's more CO2 now than at least the last 400,000 years,
Right.
if not at least 1 million years.
Yeah.
So what are the chances all the volcanoes are all of a sudden exploding
Right.
at this? You know, so I find like it's easy to put holes in people's theories.
Well,
And I even tell Put, I'm like, well, just don't tell me it's not true, but why don't you come up with something intelligent, like the Milankovitch cycles, you know? Maybe we're fast approaching, I don't know, all 3 cycles coming together. So yeah, what, you know, do you have any suggestions on how to
I think
combat
that
this?
it's been the work of very expensive industries like the oil and coal industry have put a lot of money into trying to fight this since the 1980s. So we're essentially going up against big business. Scientists are going up against big business, and as not always great communicators of information, the science is complicated. Scientists aren't always great at communicating it, and it, you know, just simply saying it's complicated, we don't have all of the evidence, which makes sense in terms of being a scientist, that the general public understands that to be like, oh, they don't have all the evidence, it can't be true.
Yeah, it's hard to change their minds. Like,
Well, there's been billions of dollars put into promoting the climate denialist ideas. You know? It's like the tobacco industry, right? When before that, they were spending millions of dollars to disprove what was really true. When, I don't know.
Yeah, none of my questions are as good as Brian's, but I'm thinking about Brian's. And I'm thinking about when I teach the graduate level ecology class, I do use the word believe a lot. Some ecologists believe that ecosystem structures are controlled by top-down. Some believe it's bottom-up. Some believe there is a clear relationship between diversity and stability in ecological systems. Some don't. So I'm wondering if it has to do with the level at which we're engaging it. And I'm thinking about your comment about, I think I might have said this in your visit before, that I think what one of the problems comes from K through 12 education that's largely science as a body of known fact that you have to memorize rather than a process that has fuzzy edges. So as soon as people encounter the fuzzy edges, it's easy to say you're not doing science anymore, it's some kind of structure.
Another piece to that is we have given great weight to what people believe in our structure of diversity. So if we call it believing in or not believing in, what I believe then has the same weight as facts because of the need for diversity. I mean, all of this really, really conflates culturally and politically. You know, our language and how we use it is really important.
I still have 3 questions, but they're not as good as this conversation.
I did too.
Well, yes, I have a comment that's kind of related to what you're saying there, Kay. One of the really interesting points you made was, one of your conclusions was that maybe we could find more ways to encourage teachers to share their personal beliefs because that's an effective way to increase the students' learning and understanding. And I wondered if you got any insights into what types of fears or of consequences teachers might have had that prevented them from sharing their personal beliefs. Because I know, as a professor here, I'm always kind of like, should I tell the students what I really think about political issues, especially in, you know, I do sort of wonder about consequences, like what are the students going to say about me on the reviews? Are they going to say that I was trying to brainwash them, that I was just a liberal shill or whatever, or, you know, with, maybe my boss is pretty cool, but would I get in trouble from something?
Glad you got it.
So, you know, I had these fears from the students and I'm afraid of my bosses as well. You know, I don't know what.
Yeah, I think that came up in the interviews. That what are you? So a lot of it was backlash from the administration, and there was evidence of that, which I cited in the full dissertation, which is available online if you want to read it. But kind of like a nasty letter from a principal saying, you know, we can't be professing our own personal beliefs about these issues. It's not up to us. So that was one instance that it was really occurring. But I think there's just that the general fear that you're saying, and, you know, as a college professor, we have much more freedom than at the K-12 level because you're not answering to parents. You know, you, well, I guess there is bosses, but principals as the all-knowing. And, so yeah, that backlash from administrators, stakeholders, and students. They don't think that 80% of their students agree that climate change is anthropogenic cause. So I think just presenting that number, that fact to them was really staggering. So this general fear exists among everybody that works as a part.
Which is one of the things that your change curriculum has great value. Because it's an established curriculum, they don't have to bring their beliefs into it. You teach it by the book that someone has given them to teach and it has been approved up here, therefore it doesn't really matter what I believe. I teach the book. And they're safe that way.
Can you tell more about the development of that curriculum and?
Yeah, and I don't have a ton of it in this, but we have a website that's available. But what we did was we worked with alpha teachers that were, so they helped to take what they're already teaching and then find topics that climate change fit in with that. So we're not developing full new curriculum. What we're doing is we're integrating it into their currently existing curriculum. So that's why we got a lot more teachers on board, both because they helped design it. And we were saying, no, you don't need to spend any extra days teaching ocean chemistry. Here you can teach ocean chemistry and look at ocean acidification or thermal expansion. And it just seamlessly went into that. Yeah, it's all available, all free online for the teachers, and it was all Word documents that they can modify and edit
I
themselves.
was talking about being very place-based to the Tampa Bay region.
Right.
Are there any plans to try to create like regional versions of it for elsewhere? Are there any folks working on things like that?
Well, the NSF did something up in like Chestertown, so like Washington D.C. area with similar things. I don't know. I mean, I think that a lot of it's applicable to here because you could say instead of the Tampa Bay, you could say the Caloosahatchee River or something. Or you could take those specific landmarks that are regional to Tampa Bay, and because we have such a similar climate, that we could use it here. But we did something similar with what they did in Maryland too. So yeah, I think it's all over the place, but I don't know of anything specific.
I just had a question about you said these were high school working science students, so that's only a tiny percentage of who needs to learn about climate change. It just seems like we need to get down into the elementary teachers and the middle school teachers. I mean, not every kid even got the curriculum.
Even in high school. This is part of the reason we were able to implement it so easily was because it's an elective. So if we required all biology students of this new curriculum, because there's an end of course test and teachers have these standardized tests that the students have to take, and so there's a real constraint about their time and what they're going to give up because they may have to give up other things. But the NGSS with the Next Generation Science Standards have included climate change and human impact as a part of their standards, but it's not in the Sunshine State Standards. So the science teachers in Florida are not teaching the Next Generation Science Standards, and therefore they don't have to teach climate change.
In your limitations, delimitations slide, which I think is 2 forward, the third bullet on the left-hand side, it had the background of the
Hard to remember
teachers.
that.
Yeah.
And so you mentioned this idea that some of those teachers were people who were trained to be teachers and some were the people with the science background that got to. Is there an opportunity to reanalyze your data now that you're done? You're done to be able to look at whether or not those 2 different forms of preparation had any kind of impact on pedagogy or beliefs?
Well, I would make the argument as a science educator that formal science education for teachers is really important. A lot of the alternative certifications that Florida teachers especially have to go through are not necessarily rigorous in preparation for development of curriculum or pedagogy or having any teaching experience even. So I would say that's of value for teachers that are expected to teach these types of curriculum. But also I have to understand that even if we did implement it into alternative certification, or we required all teachers to become professionally certified through a formal education program, the teachers that I was working with, are 10 years out of school. So, and a lot of the teachers that are teaching in the setting are 10, 20 years out of school. So we're still trying, what we're doing is we're developing professional development workshops to promote the types of pedagogy that we would want the teachers to be utilizing when teaching this curriculum. So that's really what this follow-up research is also about. Is we're taking 12 teachers from the district and really going in depth with how to use argumentative discourse, how to incorporate place-based education, how to give students a voice, use inquiry, things that they may not have gone through.
So on your conclusion slide, the first bullet, you talked about the idea that teachers are, sorry, I missed
Which way? I don't. Sorry.
Next one forward.
Forward?
Right there. Teachers are not employing the types of pedagogical methods that they listed as being effective. What the hell's going on there? I think I understand. So
Right.
we get training about what works,
Yeah.
and then you throw us in a classroom and
Yeah.
we fall back on the way we were taught rather than what we think we should be doing. That's what's going on.
Yeah, and this comes up a lot in the research with constructivists. So teachers know this idea that constructivist teaching is important and that we want students to develop their own understandings, and so that's the way we think teaching, good teaching happens. But then when the observations of the classroom take place, that isn't what happens. They know what to say and they know what to do. They're just not doing it.
And then my last question, Molly, was again, I'm always this is really cool work, right? I mean, if we're not looking hard at what we're doing, why we're doing it, how we're doing it, we're not doing the job. I'm coming to believe that there's a philosophy behind my pedagogy that maybe didn't get captured, that I don't know if you can parse out. That when we're trying to present and educate people about the challenges that the future faces, we have a tendency to slide into fear rather than mechanisms that engender hope. And my guess would be there's two, fundamentally different ways of engaging the pedagogy, whether you're trying to scare the crap out of people or whether you're trying to empower them towards what's the efficacy that you're
Yeah,
getting.
self-efficacy.
Do you see that? Is there a way to picture that? Does that make sense?
Well, in the mitigated behaviors data that we had, which I didn't do a ton with, but the idea that they can mitigate climate change in ways in which they feel comfortable or confident mitigating climate change. This isn't on here, but we asked students, would you be willing to take more public transportation? And students, it ranked really low in the Tampa Bay area. And why, is that always going to be the case if we did that same study in Chicago or New York, where public transportation is accessible and timely? And so,
Yeah, but I guess what I'm saying is that, you tie things about belief to the way that people teach,
Right.
which is separate than the way that students learn.
Right.
And I wonder if we can figure out that there are people who are approaching these kinds of challenging topics differently pedagogically. If I spend all of my time in class, most of my time in class talking about
Yeah.
mitigation practices, I might move that needle differently than if I spend 90% of my time trying to explain to them why they have to do something.
right, no,
For example.
you're right. There's literature that supports that idea that empowerment is more effective to getting people to act than doomsday scenarios.
We have evidence that when we teach students to be teachers, we give them a lot of constructivists. These are fun ways to teach, these are effective ways to teach, and this is the pedagogy that works. And then they get into the K-12 system, and they're handed a curriculum. And how much can they actually, you've been in the classroom much more recently than I have. Are they teaching based on the curriculum that they are handed, because this is the way the school wants them to teach? How much flexibility do they have to do these really good things in pedagogy? How much is their pedagogy restricted by the constraints of what they're supposed to be teaching in this particular system? I'm asking.
Well, I hear this
I
a
don't
lot,
think there's
that more like, I don't have time, or, we can't do inquiry because it takes too long, and look at everything I have to get through. So the curriculum maps are guidelines. They're not necessarily scripts. The science coordinator says, we don't want a labradoodle to come in and be able to teach the curriculum, right? We don't want to line up our curriculum map, so that's the way it can do it. So anybody can come in and teach it. But I would say there's a lot of flexibility in the way in which they teach, and which was also why we were able to develop this curriculum they're provided with a lot of materials that are suggested, but nothing in this district is, there are standards you have to get through. There's the map in which the order in which you teach it. But as far as the day-to-day and what you're doing in the classroom, really there's still a lot of flexibility that can occur.
I would say that varies from district to district, because there are districts that the principals, when they go to observe, they are looking for this on the board, and this on the board, and this on the board.
Well, yeah, but that's still occurring. I mean, the objectives and such, those sort of things are still occurring.
Well, and just that, it's very scripted in
Yeah.
some districts.
Well, this is the 8th largest district in the country. So the fact that I guess you could see it either way. If it were very small or very large, I think maybe that's probably where you find the most freedom.
I think we need some in-service education on climate change.
So I've been listening to what Wynn and Mary Kay said, and Wynn said your research is really cool, and how do we know if we're scaring students or empowering them? So after this conversation, what do you have for us? Like, do you have like an activity or a lecture that you think we should use? Yeah, like do you have something to give us? And like Mary Kay said, if you have something that gives us, and we could say, hey, we're just teaching based on this.
Well, I think I do have one of my students in here, but I've taken what I know about teachers' beliefs and really incorporated it into my classroom. I try not to be ambiguous about it anymore. Like, I know that this is a lot more of a comfortable setting to be clear about your personal biases. But I also try to be explicit in the way in which I've reached that conclusion, that it's not a willy-nilly belief about climate change, that I didn't pull it out of the sky, but that there's scientific evidence that supports it. And, until it's disputed, then I will continue to, believe that this is happening.
What if we took belief out? What if we say,
The
evidence shows or supports?
Yeah.
Yeah.
There's a 477-page report that just came out of the White House that gives you all the evidence. Don't read it. But there's a really cool 2-page summary in the executive summary.
Yeah.
That's just got all the bullet points. You don't have to read all 477 pages.
Well, see, if we're not explicit about the way in which we're reaching our conclusions, then our students are, we know where they're getting their information about climate change, and it's not from reading the IPCC, report.
Yeah, and I think belief is important, because that's a translation. There's something out there I can believe it rightly, I can believe it wrongly, but there's a translation. There's a transfer of information there. Whereas the evidence shows us this, almost says,
Well, it's a question of whether you accept the evidence or not when you decide to believe it.
Yeah, right. But I don't think belief is necessarily a lower verb there. I think belief means that you've taken that evidence and you agree with it and you incorporate it into your value system. And I think that's a good thing. I don't think I have any problem with belief used in that way at all.
I think it should be explicit that we go through that.
Yeah, I think
Sequence of
that's what
thought.
the Wilson
Make sure that-
2004 article was, that encouraging teachers to share their own personal stance on these issues, and then be explicit in the way in which you reach that. So just saying that I believe that climate change is occurring that's not going to solve all these problems. But
Not if you want them to think for themselves.
yeah. Just relying on the nature of science and how you come to those conclusions.
On the distinction of climatic studies to climatic beliefs, if we're looking at it in a teacher perspective, for like exam scores, or we want our students to actually succeed, for the students to actually think of climate change as nothing in their belief, should we try as students to mitigate their problem in order to tell them this is the evidence and this is what you actually need for your exam, rather than your own belief? Like, should we try and crush their belief, or should we try and give them a sense of there is other things around that you should believe in, rather than not believing in climate?
I'm not sure I quite understand the question.
So, yeah.
But I'm all for crushing beliefs.
Joking, brother. Are you asking if they do or don't believe it, does it impact their learning outcomes?
Yes, like in their learning outcomes, do we need to reshape them in order to satisfy the learning outcome quota?
I don't think, so not in here either, but follow-up data, I saw that we found that even a minimal amount of implementation of the curriculum, students did better on the final exam, significantly better. So that was moderate or high users of the curriculum did better than non or low users of the curriculum. So students are grasping concepts of climate change science, whether they're believers or non-believers.
So it has no change, not really an effect on that one.
I don't know if I could say that, but I did find that's the data that I have to support that.
That's one of the things I do when I teach evolution. Here's what the science says. Whether you believe it or not is up to you, but this is what the science says. And it's really a good thing to know both sides, and therefore you need to know the science. If you choose not to believe it, I can't fix that. But at least you have, I mean, we don't live under the Taliban. You have a choice of what you would believe. And I literally use that example. But you need to understand what the science is before you make that choice. I don't do it with climate change. But that's, you know, having that outcome, that positive outcome, the curriculum worked, because now at least they understand it, whether or not they internalize it is another issue entirely.
Well, thank you for the really good discussions, and really so brief in your presentations that we were able to have such rich discussion.
Thank you, Jack, for coming.
I wanted to remind everybody that we do have one more seminar